Spotify just added an awesome brand new feature to Spotify for Artists to help you track not just your listeners, but your active audience. And so we're going to be going over this active audience segment to see why it's cool, why it's good, how to interpret it. And I'm also going to cover this relatively new release engagement thing that I don't think I've ever talked about in a video. So first, this active audience thing, as far as I know, it just came out today. Never seen it before. I saw a news article about it that came out about 30 minutes ago, and so now we're going to talk about it. So the way they're defining this is these are valuable listeners who have intentionally streamed your music in the last 28 days from active sources like artist profile, album release pages, their own library, and playlists. So if you remember how, when I'm talking about ads and stuff, I'm always talking about getting saves and playlist ads, and when we run an ad campaign to promote our music, we're sending people directly to the song, and those are considered active listeners or lean-in listeners. Stuff from playlisting, whether it's third-party, algorithmic, editorial, radio, etc., those are lean back or passive listening because the person isn't actively choosing to consume your music. And I've always kind of guessed that Spotify values the active lean-in people more. And this is just kind of another data point to prove that they do value that, which makes sense, right? Because these are people that are engaging with your music by their own choice. So the first thing you can look at, if I flip back to overview, I have 53,000 monthly listeners. Part of the reason why it's so high, and it's been so high over the last month, it was like 60, I think, a little bit ago, is because I'm testing out a playlist service to make another review video. So that's another thing to consider why this is high. Normally, I'm around 30 to 35,000 monthly listeners-ish. And so my active audience is 18,000 people. So these are people who have gone out of their way to stream my music directly in the past 28 days. And this is kind of a reflection of my, I won't want to say core audience per se, but because I haven't dropped a new song in 6 to 8 weeks, so I'm falling behind. So these are people who aren't just, this isn't boosted from ad campaigns right now. This is kind of just my static audience, which is cool. But you can also track this stuff over time down here. But first, let's talk about these different segments that Spotify gives us. So they have what they call super listeners, moderate listeners, and light listeners. So anyone that streamed your music once or a couple times in an active way, they are going to fall into this light listeners category. So that makes up 70% of my active listeners, which makes sense, a couple times in the last 28 days. And then we have moderate, people who intentionally stream your music many times. They don't define what many times is, unfortunately, but I'm guessing it's more than a couple. So let's say it's 4, 5, 6 times. That's my guess. So that's 5,000 or so people, which is cool. And they're explaining these light people can develop into moderate listeners, and these moderate listeners can develop into super listeners. And these super listeners, again, not defined. They're the most dedicated active listeners the last 28 days. They're the most likely to keep streaming music. There's about 600 of those folks. So I wish they provided a little more definition for what this meant. But this is actually the data that Amazon Music for Artists also provides. So this is kind of similar in vagueness. They define fans in Amazon Music for Artists, and they have super fans, which they don't tell you exactly what that means. Now, we can also plot this stuff day by day down here, and you can see total active, super, moderate, light. So this top one is our total active. And you can see since I haven't dropped a song in a while and haven't been promoting a new song in a while, I am kind of dropping. So I've gone in the last month from 19.7 down to 18.4 or so, which I think is reasonable considering no new music. But then it's kind of also reflected in the super, moderate, and light. So from super, I went from 816 to 597. For light, I went to 13.3 down to 12.9. So the light one stayed pretty much constant. The super and moderate ones dropped the most, but it still stayed relatively static, which is cool. And so this isn't the most life-changing features in the world, of course, but I think this data is really good for an artist to just more accurately separate all of this stuff. Because if we go in source of streams, we can see, I don't know why I'm so zoomed out here, but we can see where people are coming from, but it's not as easy to really parse all this data through, and you can't graph it over time. You can technically go on audience engagement, go to source of streams and listeners' own playlists and library, artist profile, and catalog, and you could see, how this is happening. This is great, but this just gives you another way to interpret this data and kind of split those people off into separate tiers. So more on that in the future as I do more campaign. And by the way, if you're wondering how you can actually promote your music on Spotify, the way that I found the best is using Facebook ads. And I have a dedicated course full of a ton of videos, a community where you can ask questions, and access to my country placement targeting spreadsheet. So check the link up there and check the link in the description if you're interested in that. It's called Spotify Growth Machine. But now let's talk about this release engagement thing. So this has been out for a little bit longer. And this data point kind of shows why I don't focus as much on followers as I do on saves and playlist ads. Because here, this song has been out for, well, longer. It's been out since January 13th. Today's March 29th, so 7 weeks or something. And this is the first 28 days. So 5% of my 14,000 Spotify followers streamed the song in the first 28 days. And you might be thinking, Andrew, that sucks. And you'd be right, that does suck. But when I've looked, I have access to like 70 artists, Spotify for Artists account, and I can't show them to you because, I could, but a lot of people would be mad at me. But I have access to people with, 500,000, 300,000 monthly listeners, several million monthly listeners, and like those people, actually just looking at everyone from small to large, this percentage is typical. It's usually between 3% and 7%. I found that if you're a new artist and you're actively growing your audience, like recently, especially with ads and not playlisting, then this number will be higher, maybe like 10%, in some extreme cases like 15%, but over time it's going to drop. And then there's an artist with over 1 million monthly listeners, but he's been growing for decades, like since before Spotify was founded. So his followers have been growing since forever, and his release engagement is 2%. He has like 150,000 followers, and only like 2 to 3% of them check out every release in the first 28 days. It stops tracking after 28. So like you can see, it's probably still going up. They just only track the first 28. But you can go back and look at each individual song here, at least in the last 6 months, and see like this one was 4.9, and then this one was 5%. If you have dropped more music in the last 6 months, as you should, I've just kind of been a bad example artist, you will be able to see your release engagement. So this is good at measuring the quality of your followers, but more importantly, it brings up a more important point about followers on Spotify. Followers are great because every time you drop a new release, they get some way to get notified. Release radar, you might even show up on the homepage. But just like subscribers on YouTube, if you're not subscribed, hit that subscribe button. The subscribe button doesn't necessarily mean you guarantee see my videos. Just like on Spotify, a follow doesn't mean you guarantee see the new music. If you interact with my videos a lot, my videos are going to be following you around YouTube for several weeks if you just watch enough of my videos in a row. Spotify does a similar thing where if you listen to an artist a ton, they just start recommending their music to you. And if you follow, that's another signal that their algorithm uses to push your content. What is a guaranteed way to have your music as more of a part of your listeners' daily routine is if they save the song to their liked songs playlist, which just means they click that heart button. Because a lot of people will just click that playlist and just play it. And that means you're just a part of their routine for like the next several years potentially. And similarly, if they add you to a playlist like their workout playlist, their driving playlist, their study playlist, whatever it is, people have playlists and they either listen to the like songs one or they shuffle a playlist that they have. And now you're integrated into their musical life. So whenever they loop that playlist, every so often you'll come up. And that's why I value saves and listeners much more than followers. This data point just kind of proves that followers are cool, but most people don't ever even see your new release, which is, it's just kind of the same thing on Instagram and YouTube and whatever. So those are the new features in Spotify for Artists. This active audience thing is cool. Release engagement thing is helpful. Hopefully we'll get more cool features in the future. If you want to learn more about how to run Facebook ads to promote your music on Spotify and other streaming services, you can learn a bunch more in these other videos that I have right here. And if you want to check out that Spotify Growth Machine course that I have for a more organized approach, access to the community, and some extra resources to help you along the way, you can check that out right here. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.